All right, y'all. So we're back at it. Listen, I'm gonna be up these days. I'm not getting asleep until 3 or 4 in the morning, and I have an assignment that I need to get done. So, anywho, we're back at it. I found this resource through my university. Um, fair use, fair use, fair use, and I will be sure to cite this. Fair use. I should have put a sticky note, dag on it, on the screen. Hopefully, this records the sounds as well. Um, yeah, I think I haven't watched it all. I think I watched about 15 minutes, but it does a pretty good job. It kind of does. And so we're going to get into this, y'all. I'm going to have to record this in two parts, but let's go. Shackles of Memory, the anti-slave trade. Hold on. Y'all be mad at me if I sped this up. Ooh, listen, these days I'm listening to everything on 3 times speed, but let me see. I don't think it's too fast.
Imagine a seaborne trade which would be so profitable that it would make the fortune not only of ship owners and merchants, but also of those harbours and cities in the kingdom that devoted themselves to it. Imagine this lucrative activity extended to the great nations of Europe, England, Portugal, Spain, France, the Netherlands, Denmark, and others. You might doubt such a wonder. Yet this only was the legacy of the discoveries of the navigators and conquistadors of the 15th century. Did you know that in order to extract the riches of the new worlds, an abundant labour force was needed? And that the unfortunate indigenous peoples of these lands who were reduced to slavery were dying from hard labour and the diseases brought from Europe? Turn your attention now towards this Africa, so coveted by the Portuguese, and these black men whose appearance caused such surprise in the royal courts of the time. They say that Africans are strong and naturally suited for work in tropical climates. Thus, economic necessities dictated to reduce them to slavery, to clear and to cultivate American lands, otherwise sugar would be too expensive. Imagine then, for more than 3 centuries, thousands of ships leaving European harbours for the African coast, where they loaded thousands of black captives brought with trade merchandise and selling them as slaves in the West Indian colonies. For the return trip, these same vessels brought back those colonial goods which polite society held in such high esteem. Imagine the pattern of trade thus established that linked Europe, Africa, and the Americas along such convenient sailing routes, and you will have to concede that the Atlantic slave trade had made of this ocean the centre of world trade. Could one doubt that it was concern for the economic interest of the kingdom that led the government to regulate the slave trade? The monopoly companies created or supported by the French royal government put together capital, public as well as private. But misfortunes and the successive bankruptcies of the Compagnie des Indes Occidentales, the Compagnie de Guinée, and then the Compagnie du Sénégal appeared to justify private businessmen who demanded freedom of trade as well as government protection and aid.
Order of the King's Council of State, which brings to 200 livres per head the subsidy granted to French merchants for blacks carried on French trading ships.
And a similar concern for the common good and for free enterprise appeared to drive the merchants of Nantes when they wrote to the authorities,
"The slave trade, which is carried on the coasts of Africa, is most advantageous to French navigation, to French trade and French colonies. It encourages shipbuilding and shipowning. It gives employment to countless workers, sailors and navigators. It creates vast outlets for produce and commodities. And lastly, without it, it would be impossible to cultivate our American islands."
Consult the shipping company's reports and account books, peruse trade registers, study financial transactions and the expenses of trading campaigns, Appraise the estimated and actual profits, and you will come to understand the harsh laws of this business. An 1802 estimate in the name of shipowner Mathurin Trottier could serve as an example. In order to equip La Bonne Mère, a slave ship sent to carry 300 to 350 blacks, expenses, the outlay, amounted to 200,000 livres, but the expected profit was 275,000 livres. How could one raise such large funds? By approaching the parties involved, financiers, bourgeois, managers, colonists, and even people with a small private income, in order to assemble the necessary capital. Once the outlay was secured, the ship owner gave the order to equip the ship. In the harbour of Nantes, in La Fosse, a feverish activity rules over the shipyard. Workers are building, repairing, rigging, and fitting out hundreds of ships. Foundries and workshops are producing tools, anchors, cannons, hinges, and nails. Factories bustle about producing sails and ropes. Shipyards in Masseaut are famous, and slaving expeditions wear out a ship in a matter of a few years. Slave traders preferred corvettes and frigates 15 to 45 meters long, measuring 50 to 400 tons. The still heavy curve of the hulls limited their average speed to 5 knots. A copper sheathing reduced the damage of parasitic marine vegetation and woodworms in tropical waters. At first sight, a slave ship did not differ from any other vessel. One needs, however, to uncover their secret. Please have a look under the upper deck in the steerage. To make a good cargo, a height of 1.4 to 1.8 meters must be left open between the upper and the lower deck. It is in the steerage that the trade merchandise will be packed, and later the human merchandise. In the hold, under the waterline, are stored abundant supplies and numerous barrels of fresh water. Depending on their draft, the ships are loaded in the ports of either Nantes or Paimboeuf, downstream in the estuary of the Loire River. You must realize that the cargoes which are put together for the slave trade are bringing wealth not only to the Nantes region, but also to many provinces of France and of other European kingdoms. Fields and vineyards supply food, wines, and spirits. Workshops, mills, and factories deliver arms, gunpowder, lead, iron bars, and hardware. Add to this glass beads and items of cheap jewelry, bales of Brazilian tobacco imported from Lisbon, and thousands of pounds of cowries, these shells from the Maldive Islands, which are one of the trade currencies of Africa. In addition, 2/3 of the cargo is made up of textiles, cloths, and cotton fabrics, and in particular, on pain of spoiling one's trading campaign, calicos. These brightly coloured cloths in the Indian style, printed with woodcuts, whose manufacturing occupies in Nantes a dozen factories and several thousand workers.
Embarqué sur le Saint-François, embarqué sur le Saint-François, mon matelot, mon mouche et moi, mon tadirira, la la, mon tadirira, la lire.
To ensure that the expedition will be successful, the intelligent shipowner chooses his captain in person. He looks for a trusted navigator who has a good knowledge of matters of trade and who will look after the interests of the shipping company. As commander of the ship, the captain then recruits the crew, 10 to 60 men depending on the size of the vessel. Under his authority, officers, seamen, novices and ship's boys embark for the long triangular journey. For the jobs of boatswain, master carpenter, master cooper and cook, whose tasks are of a vital importance for the expedition, the captain hires sailors with well-confirmed skills. As for the surgeon, his capacities are often unclear. His main role is to select and to brand as slaves, and to prevent illnesses and epidemics which are frequent among both captives and sailors. Imagine now that throughout this 18th century, more than 600 vessels and 48,000 sailors left the estuary of the River of Nantes, and the slave ships sailed on, with their names full of symbols: the Black Princess, the Good Father, virtue, love, fraternity, equality, justice, and so many others.
Il est monté pour prendre un riz, mon tadirira, la la, mon tadirira, la lire. Il est monté pour prendre un riz, il est monté pour prendre un riz. Un coup de mer l'aura surpris, mon tadirira, la la, mon tadirira, la lire. Un coup de mer l'aura surpris, un coup de mer l'aura surpris. On a retrouvé son sabot, mon tas de rira, mon tas de rira.
After 3 to 12 weeks of travel, the coast of the Black Continent appears on the horizon. The ship cast anchor near the mouth of a river or near a shore at the gates of Africa. A land of ancient civilization, which Western imagination peopled with legends and mysteries, Africa stirred up curiosity and lust. Its landscapes, its climates, its peoples and their history, their way of life and their cultures both surprised and frightened. Until colonization, Europeans explored only the coasts of Africa, otherwise remaining as ignorant of its interior geography as of its inmost realities. Throughout the centuries, chiefdoms, city-states, kingdoms and empires appeared, fought or followed one another, sometimes leaving behind vestiges of their past greatness. African societies and the political powers which governed them juxtaposed or combined feudal-type structures with administrative and centralized organizations comparable to those of European states. From the 12th to the 17th century, all regions of sub-Saharan Africa experienced a remarkable economic, political and cultural development. Everyday life revolved around agricultural or artisanal activities. The ethnic group, the village and the lineage were the foundations of the rural communities, dominated by the chiefdoms and the aristocracy. A traditional form of slavery, familial and local, was practiced. The victims of raids, the vanquished in wars between lineages, clans or states, and their offspring, became war or household slaves. Employed in the army, the administration, agriculture, trade or domestic service, slaves could hold high offices, start a family, or be freed. This traditional slavery fed an internal market, but there was also a very old slave trade practiced by Arab merchants, who supplied the markets of North Africa and the Middle East. From antiquity to the 20th century, slave caravans journeyed up the trans-Saharan and East African routes. 12 to 14 million black captives were thus taken away and sold in the Arab world. Before even the discovery of the Americas, Portuguese caravels, armed for peace and for war, reached the western and eastern coasts of the land where people are extremely black. A barter trade began. Tools, fabrics and horses were exchanged for gold, ivory, gum arabic, spices, leather and slaves. From Goree Island to Angola and down to Mozambique, in the wake of Portugal, the great countries of Europe, Netherlands, France, England and Denmark, built and fought over fortified trading posts. Conceded by African chiefs, who turned the situation to their advantage, these coastal outposts became the main locations of the slave trade. In the 17th and 18th century, the constantly renewed demand for slave labor of European planter colonists in the Americas grew to enormous proportions. While Islam extended its influence, on the West African coast, the Atlantic slave trade favored the prosperity of the kingdoms of Oyo, Benin and Loango, and the emergence of new powers, Ashanti and Dahomey. Becoming trading partners of European slavers, these states wove a web of exchange of trade goods and slaves with kingdoms in the interior, their associates or their accomplices, and attempted to control for their sole profit the trade in human beings. In spite of resistance and revolts, the slave trade became more intense, insidiously creating a chronic state of war and violence and causing irreparable population movements and economic upheavals. Meanwhile, around the trading posts, local authorities and a mob of dignitaries, courtiers and interpreters became rich from the price of blood and from corruption. Devastated by the slave trade, sub-Saharan Africa was losing for a long time its living strength. Arriving from Liverpool, London, Bristol, Lisbon, Lagos, Cadiz, Nantes or Amsterdam, the slave ships sometimes practiced an improvised form of trade, navigating along the coast, looking for African chiefs willing to sell them captives in exchange for their goods. To this sailing barter, which could last more than a year, captains preferred trade in harbours or on land in the trading posts. Business there was more profitable, and the stay in Africa was shorter. Sea captains, company employers, traders and priests have left us treatises and testimonies on the various operations of the slave trade. Let's hear them.
Every ship to be admitted to trade in Ouida pays to the king a custom in merchandise worth 8 to 10 slaves, depending on the size of the ship. Then it begins its trade. The king of the Dahomeyans has 4 or 5 merchants who sell solely on his behalf the products of the raids that he orders on his neighbours and sometimes on his own subjects, or finally prisoners who have been captured by him during wars. The other merchants sell, either on commission or on their own account, the slaves who are brought from...
Hold on one second, y'all. I didn't want to stop.
And sometimes on a ship. Then...
Let's hear them.
Saw Judah mention.
Every ship to be admitted to trade in Ouida pays to the king a custom in merchandise worth 8 to 10 slaves, depending on the size of...
Wait.
Every ship to be admitted to trade in Ouida.
Because there are texts that I want to go into that talk about where the kingdoms of Judah were set up. All right, I don't want to get too sidetracked, my bad, but I think that's interesting. I'm just saying. Anyway.
Pays to the king a custom in merchandise worth 8 to 10 slaves, depending on the size of the ship. Then it begins its trade. The king of the Dahomeyans has 4 or 5 merchants who sell solely on his behalf the products of the raids that he orders on his neighbours and sometimes on his own subjects, or finally prisoners who have been captured by him during wars. The other merchants sell, either on commission or on their own account, the slaves who are brought from several parts of Africa. When these slaves arrive, the merchants send for the whites, who come and buy them.
The basic part of this trade consists in praising the trade goods in your cargo, in selling first those goods which are more plentiful or cheaper, and in paying a moderate price on the first blacks, India pieces, that you buy, because this first price will serve as a standard for your ship's whole trading campaign. Out of mutual jealousy, Europeans have hurt each other's trade and have taught Africans to take advantage of the competition between several nations, and even between several ships of the same nation, by making them pay double the ordinary value of a black.
When these slaves disembark, they're all locked up in jail, and when we want to buy them, they're brought to us in a large square, where after having been stripped naked, without distinction of sex, they're inspected down to the smallest part of their body by our surgeons. Meanwhile, there is an iron in the fire with the arms of the company. When it is hot, it is applied on the chest of those who have been chosen. When we've come to an agreement with the masters of the slaves are brought back to the jail where they live at our expense. Thus, to reduce costs, we send them back as soon as possible on board ship. But prior to that, they're stripped of everything they own by their masters, and both men and women enter the ship stark naked and remain in this state.
As soon as the merchandise was unloaded, the carpenter and his mates modified the steerage in order to increase the volume where the slaves would be packed together. Depending on the ship's tonnage, between 50 and 600 men, women and children could be carried on each trip.
A slave ship is built in such a manner that the deck or the upper deck is split in two by a tall and strong plank, which is called the fort. On the side of the plank, which faces the rear of the ship, are the women and the children. On the other side, towards the bow, are the men who can neither see the women nor come near them. Moreover, the men are tied together in groups of 2 by irons around their hands and feet. The men are arranged in rows, along each of which runs a chain which passes in between their legs. Hence, they cannot get up or move without permission. There is always a guard post, which has to watch over most carefully all of the movements of the blacks.
In spite of terror, slave warders and chains, rare but violent revolts did break out, which were repressed without mercy. The captain of the ship, La Sirène, noted on his log in 1751,
We bought 469 blacks, but we were obliged to kill 199 during a revolt. Hence, we were left with the opposite 270.
ultimate fits of despair, escapes and suicides, sometimes called the watchful crew unawares. On the 11th of March 1741, the log of the Notre-Dame de Bonne Garde simply mentions,
As we were about to say the prayer, we had the misfortune of losing 4 women, or negresses, who threw themselves into the sea. We were unable to find out why.
on these floating prisons, the slaves endured a journey without return of 3 to 12 weeks across the Atlantic Ocean.
They cannot either get up or make any move without permission. They are permitted to do so only in the morning to go on deck, and in the evening to come back inside the ship. But since their number is so great, they may enjoy this refreshment only every other day. For the rest of the time, they remain down in the hold, packed like sardines.
Fear, ill treatment, disease, and epidemics decimated the slave cargoes. But the crews were not spared either, and sometimes more than 2/3 of the sailors and their prisoners died during the ocean crossing. The slave ships sailed towards the sugar islands of the Caribbean in South America. The slave ships from Nantes landed especially in Saint-Domingue, in Martinique, and in Guadeloupe.
When a ship has reached its destination, the captain tries to unload his cargo as fast as possible for fear of more deaths. He gives orders to feed the slaves copiously for a few days, to rub their bodies with oil of Parma Christi in order to make them appear more live, in a word, to neglect nothing that would give them the appearance of health and vigor. When these preparations are complete, the captain has the sale of his cargo advertised in the public sheets.
Yeah, because when you force feed that much into someone malnourished, that will cause them to die. Anyway, I'm going to stop it right here. I don't have much time left. I will pick back up in another part to finish recording this. And this is mainly, regards to the West Indies and the Caribbean and South America, as they mentioned. Not so much. Maybe they'll get to that at a later time as this progressed in North America as we know it. But I did find that interesting because in some texts that do talk about the kingdom of Judah and the tribe of Judah written of in scripture, they drop the H. So the H is not always included. And so it's interesting to see that with the Dahomey, I guess. And just wanting to know more particulars, man, and correlations between the biblical maps and these kingdoms on the continent of Africa and where those people dispersed, and then how these chiefdoms and powers came to arise to enslave a lot of those people in those areas. Is there relevance? Is there a connection? I don't know. That's the question, and I'm going to do the digging to figure it the freak out. But yeah, thank y'all for tuning in again. This was very interesting. I'm probably going to binge a ton of these. I'll try to record ones that I think really do offer a pretty decent explanation of what happened. Certainly more than what is being taught and touted about these days. So yeah, again, subscribe, comment, share, like. Thank you for tuning in. Be blessed.